right, Robby. This is somewhat of an emergency podcast day. Emergency podcast. Here's the trick, though. We don't want to tell people why it's an emergency podcast. So let me just say that yesterday there was breaking news, a casting, not even rumor, a confirmed outlet confirmed a casting for an upcoming MCU film that you texted me and you said, I have a theory on this. I don't have a hot take per se on said casting. However, I am dying to hear this theory. Why am I talking like this? Because if you truly want to know nothing about any of the upcoming projects, you want your head in the sand about all this stuff, which to a degree I understand because there would be fun things to not have known anything about, then maybe today's episode is not for you. However, I am dying to hear this theory, and welcome back to Friends from Work, a podcast about all things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as you're going to find out in about 2 seconds, hosted by me, Kyle Sconoel, and him, Robby Earl. So, Robby, that's my disclaimer. You can give a disclaimer, too, before we jump right into this. But this is going to be a short episode on this theory on said person.
Yeah. So I would just say, if you don't want to know anything, yeah, you should turn this off. If you are kind of on the fence, it was a massive casting announcement. So if you're curious to have the discussion or to hear what we're talking about, the reason we're being so circumspect is it's not like someone was announced that would just be like a random fun cameo. That doesn't seem to be what's happening. So that's why we're being cagey. But I am, I'm excited about it. So I'm excited to talk about it for a second. But this is the off ramp where if you've made it this far and you do not, in fact, want to hear about the casting or what we have to say, this is your exit spot.
While those people are turning it off, is there anything else you want to tell us about your day? Anything else you got for me today? Before this casting room? What do you got for me? Give me something.
Well,
what's something I don't know about you?
I am apparently a better haggler than I thought than I was.
I am not good at it at all. What makes you say that?
I feel like I'm not normally very good at it, in part because I tend to be a pretty gullible person. So if someone's like, this is what you should pay, I'm normally like, yeah, seems right. But
they're not overcharging me.
Yeah, I mean, why would they? They said that they weren't. I specifically asked them not to.
You cheated on me when I specifically asked you not to?
I had to settle a case that I was handling, and it went really well. I was really happy with it's.
And then
it's
you
nice
haggled on how much they pay you after that?
No, thankfully. Although maybe I could just once I get good results, I'm just going to start being like, it's extra.
Well, what did you haggle?
No, I haggled the amount of like the case settled. And so I was representing a defendant in the case. And
so how much you got them?
So we negotiated a deal by which the plaintiff in the case, we would pay them a certain amount and call the case resolved, which is common. That's normally how cases end. Now, they rarely actually go all the way to trial. But I was able to negotiate a much, much lower amount. That was like a fraction of the damages, which was.
Is there something that I could sue for that you could help me? I need some money right now, so that you could haggle for me. If you have any ideas, I'm open to ideas. I feel like it would help financially.
Well, it's also nice because if we sue on you've got way more leverage when you're the one suing. When you're the one being sued, ultimately it's like, what if we pay you this much? And the other side can just be like, no. But when you're the one suing, you can always just be like, we will accept nothing less than this.
$1 million for my emotional trauma, for something like that.
Yeah, just period. Just emotional trauma you've accumulated.
That's the tab I've racked up at this point.
Yeah. No, we can work on that.
I would like that. I need that. Also, last shout out before we dive in. Nice beanie. For those who are not watching on YouTube or on Spotify, Robby is rocking the FFW beanie, which probably is my personal favorite merch item that you've seen me wear on this podcast. And I wear this time of year 5 times a week. That's not an exaggeration. Because I'm also balding. So I always wear hats because I'm balding. And so I wear my beanie all the time. So Friends from Work beanie on our website, the ffwpodcast.com.
And I've said it before, I'll say it again, just as relevant in 2024 as it was in 2023 because of Deadpool and Wolverine. So, when we put it out, we thought it was just Loki-centric, but it turns out it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Even if it is Loki-centric, though, it just looks dope. I mean,
it's so great.
Look at you. Okay, so you've had enough time to exit the podcast. Here is what I was sent. The article I was sent. Oh, my goodness. I don't even know how to feel about this. Sorry. We've successfully submitted a press application for Comic-Con. You love to see it. Thanks, Pete.
I just saw that.
That's the text I got while I was doing this. Sorry.
San Diego Comic-Con, no less.
That's the hope, everybody. The hope is that your boys are walking to the convention center at San Diego Comic-Con in about 7 months. Chris Evans is apparently going to be in Avengers Doomsday. And this article said not just in it, but is like co-starring alongside Robert Downey Jr. It said something like that, didn't it? It didn't say just like in it. It didn't make it seem like it was a cameo.
Let me see. Since then, even, which is part of why I feel okay with us talking about this here. It's been reported by the Hollywood Reporter and Variety. And I think, we don't know what role it is, but it does seem like it's being discussed as a starring role or at least a prominent role. Like I don't think it would be something like we already got in Deadpool and Wolverine.
So as we've talked about so many times in this podcast, I think literally last week on our Thanksgiving episode, we talked again about our feelings with RDJ and how that brings up such mixed emotions in me and many of the listeners that we have. I feel the same way here. I'm going to let you give me your theory. I just, when I read it, I'm like, there's a part of me that's like, let's freaking go. As you mentioned, the tone of just Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. being in the MCU helps make every project just feel something about it. Like this feels right. This feels like the heyday. This feels like Marvel again. So there's a positive there. It's obviously met with a lot of backlash in like the comments section on these news things of people being like, oh, Marvel doesn't know how to do anything else. And look at them falling back into, oh, nothing's working now. So here's what we have. There's a lot of that. I looked for maybe literally 30 seconds and probably saw 40 of those comments. And then I was like, this is stupid. I'm not going to. So a lot of people being like, oh, look how broken it is. They don't know anything else. And then all the opinions in between. Like I'm almost in between where I said last week, I think Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom is cool. And I love him as a human. I love him as an actor. I love him being involved. But like it might have also been fun to give the on-ramp to Cillian Murphy and have someone else just take it and start fresh and try to do a whole new thing that recaptures glory. And now with this Chris Evans news, now I'm almost to the point, Robby, where between the Russos, RDJ, Chris Evans, and Alan Silvestri, which is rumored to be doing the music, I'm thinking, okay, at this point, they know something we don't. I don't think they're stupid enough to just go, like this was the last straw for me. I don't think they're stupid enough to go, wow, just Marvel isn't working. What can we do? How are we going to make something cool? Let's just get all the old crew back and that will be fine. We'll find a way to make it work. There's no way that's the motivating factor. So when I read that, I'm thinking this has got to be an intentional, like alternate universe type thing that specifically is meant to elaborate or embellish on what they did in Endgame. Because I just don't think all those guys, Chris Evans included, are just going, yeah, let's just, I'll just come back and see if you can write another story for Cap. That'd be fun. Or, I'll be Steve Rogers and I don't even care. I just don't think it's that willy-nilly. So now the fact that all of them are there, I'm like, okay, this may be more of I'll let you tell your theory, but this may be more of a transition movie than I thought. So for a long time, people have talked about maybe Robert Downey Jr. is not even the only Doom. Maybe it's like, it's a thing for a while, but then they eventually get like, whatever it's called, the main Doctor Doom, and it's somebody else. Or maybe Doctor Doom is being used as a transition to a different villain that's in somebody else. And that's ultimately going to be like the next 6 years to someone else or something. But just with Chris Evans coming back now, it's like, okay, they must know something I don't, obviously. That was my thought.
Well, and do we know if is Robert Downey Jr. confirmed to be in Secret Wars as well, or just Doomsday?
I'm not the person you should ask. Greg, if you're listening, you can share that with me.
Yeah.
Or fact check it right now.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like...
I mean, he would have to be, right? There's no way they're going to kill him in the first movie.
Wars. Yeah, I think he is.
But you remember how you told me about how in the comics, like, Kang is kind of around and he's doing stuff and you're like, oh, he's a bad dude. And then you meet Dr. Doom and you're like, oh, that's kind of the real bad guy kind of thing. Do you wonder if there's a little bit of that with Dr. Doom now? So like they don't have Kang, but maybe Dr. Doom is like a bad guy. And then you meet like, I don't know what it'd be, but like, oh, but this is really the problem for Secret Wars.
Yeah. I mean, that is the interesting thing that we've talked about a lot, and Candace and I have talked about some as we've been going through the Hickman comics that are obviously already in the process of being adapted in the Phase 4, Phase 5 stuff, and likely going to be adapted to some degree in Secret Wars. They're, like the major villain in that whole kind of Avengers run is not so much a person as it is just the incursions themselves. So that's kind of one piece of it that really has not been explored hardly at all, other than in Multiverse of Madness. Doesn't mean it won't still be. I think that in some ways Deadpool and Wolverine set up the possibility for more of that now that we know the role that the TVA is playing. But that's kind of one of the villains. And then the Doctor Doom piece, it is really hard to separate Doctor Doom from either the 80s or the 2015 Secret Wars. Kang, which actually sort of leads perfectly into my theory here.
Yeah, let's hear it. I want to hear it. By the way, I didn't get confirmation. Like Google says, like, yes, he is set to reprise his role as Tony Stark is what the Google AI thing says. And I'm like, I think they're messed up on that or they're confused on that. But I do wonder if there's going to be some kind of play with that. So like, I think Robert Downey Jr. will be in that movie in some way. But I don't know if it will be a flashback to Tony Stark or an alternate reality Tony Stark or just Doctor Doom or multiple Doctor Dooms. Like, I don't know, but I think he'll be in the movie in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so it's telling. Like, there was all this talk before Deadpool and Wolverine about what that would mean for Logan because it was such a perfect send-off. And I feel like that is actually a pretty fair comparison when you look at RDJ's send-off as Tony in Endgame. I think most people think both were pretty perfect. Both feel like those actors were really uniquely suited for those roles, and it's hard to really see anyone else doing it. And whether you like Deadpool and Wolverine or not, and I get the sense most people did, I don't know that anyone feels like it disturbed what Logan did. As much as they kind of poked fun at that in the movie itself, like I don't think that was really a concern after the movie came out, because if anything, it kind of made points within the movie to put that up further on a pedestal. And I say that because I do think, like, if there is a moment where we actually have Tony Stark, if there is a moment where we actually have Steve Rogers, and even if they're versions of the characters that we are familiar with, I think I'm now realizing there is a world where you can do that and also leave good story moments kind of undisturbed, because of the conclusion of this like multiverse saga, and just some of the kind of like the ways that we can play with time and the different things you can do that wouldn't necessarily change what's happened already. I'm not saying that that is what's going to go on, but I think Deadpool and Wolverine has sort of shown me, yes, I think if we like got Tony Stark back and it's the Tony Stark we knew, or even if it's like a variant and like we end Secret Wars and we've got like Tony back and we just keep rolling, like that would undo the magic of Endgame. But I don't think having him show up in one or both of those movies as Tony would necessarily do that.
So I think you're right, and I don't think it's just us trying to justify a wrong opinion and change our minds on it. I think the other factor, there's two things to me also in play. One is that it's just been a lot of time. You always underestimate that. Like, it's been 6 years by the time he shows up since Avengers Endgame. And so like there is a part of you that just because it's been that long, it's already cemented in your heart. Like, for example, if you were showing your kids this movie in 10 years, you could still just stop at Endgame and explain like that was the end of it. So there's a little bit of like, I underestimate that factor. What if it's 10 years later? Can he ever do it again? Could he ever have some way to do it? So I'm underestimating that. So I think there is a chance of that. And the second thing is, I think when you look at Doomsday and Secret Wars, and you can inform me on this, but my impression is it would just be really hard to tell certain stories without Tony Stark. Right? Isn't there, like, he's such a key player in some of those comics that to a certain degree you can kind of replace him with stand-in personalities. But I think at some point you hit a hurdle where you're like, man, it would just be more effective if there was a Tony Stark here to butt heads with Doctor Strange or Reed Richards, or because I don't even know that Bruce would fill that same role, right? Even though he's smart, I don't think it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think.
But then also about what you were talking about, and I want to hear about your Captain America theory or Steve Rogers theory specifically, or maybe somebody else. I don't even know. I think you said, it would be undoing it if a different variant came in and he kind of acted the same, but the explanation was, well, it's just a different universe, Tony, but now he's in ours. And it's so weird for me to say this, but I almost wonder if that's not the case anymore, because what you just said, they literally did that in Deadpool and Wolverine. That's true. It's not the Wolverine that we know, but by the end of the movie, you kind of love that Wolverine, and now he's around. Like, now that Wolverine's going to be the one probably to be involved in Secret Wars. And that's not even the same Wolverine, but to the audience, we're like, yeah, okay, great. It's Wolverine. So it's like, I feel like in a way with time, they're getting their cake and eating it too. In that
that's actually a really good point.
They're literally getting the audience to go, oh, you know what? They didn't touch Logan. I'm so thankful they never messed up Logan, because this is a different one. Yeah. While still getting all the emotional weight of like, but that's Logan that we know, and he does the sacrifice play, and he's like this. And I think almost the same thing would happen at this point. If Tony Stark showed back up, you'd be like, oh man, that's not our Tony Stark though. He died in the ultimate sacrifice play. But after a movie or a few years later, you'd be like carrying all of the emotional baggage of the way Tony's quippy and like his relationship with Pepper, and like you would still carry that with you when he talks, and you'd be like, eventually you'd be like, oh, it's Tony Stark, it's good to have him back. You know what I mean? True.
No, that's a good point. But then
if someone challenged you on it at like a trivia game, you'd be like, yeah, but that's not the Tony Stark, rest in peace.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing for Tony is, we've talked about it before, there will just be a point where it no longer really makes sense, like age-wise. Like if, like not currently, right. But like if you were to try
getting older,
run,
legitimately older,
where it's just and that's something that I think Hugh
like
Jackman
they joke about with Hugh Jackman. Literally, they can't do it till he's 90. Right. Like it just doesn't work.
But even if he does it for another 10 years or whatever, which I don't think would happen, but even if Hugh Jackman does stick around for that long, they could kind of even sell that some, because like he's supposed to look like, I know he doesn't age per se, but you always see Wolverine in the comics looking pretty like grizzled. Like, like Tony is supposed to be kind of like the
like
smooth
Ladies
talking.
Man. Yeah.
Whereas like, I think, but again, to your point, I do think you're right. And I think what I would say that again, also kind of leads into the theory that I can get into. All of these conversations, specifically around the Steve Rogers and Tony thing, I get it. Like I get that it looks like they're running it back, and you know, to some extent they just are. I think the question is just whether that's inherently a bad thing.
Yeah,
but
right, exactly.
But what I would say is like, okay, you you kind of have to remember, like, yes, the Marvel universe is big. Like the comics universe is big. It spans decades. It spans.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Multiple universes within.
But
there are main Marvel characters that have been mainstays of the comics for years and years, no matter how many, like every now and then.
I know. So think about this for 1 second. Think about this.
Yeah.
Let's say that Hugh Jackman does play Logan for another 10 years. That they sign in a contract with him. He's going to be Logan whenever that shows up for 10 more years. You and I are going to be like old. I mean, at that point, we're talking 2034. Logan is still Hugh Jackman, right? But here's the thing. If they can still milk 10 more years out of it, there's a part of me that thinks they're going to go, let's use him for 10 more years. We'll figure out 10 years down the road, because maybe at some point they're going to either have to A, stop, or totally start over, reboot.
Right.
Because at some point you have to have endings for characters. Characters and actors have to be able to move away from the movies. Right. And then there's going to be an irreplaceable gap, because that is a character that exists forever in comics. So at some point, they either need to then 10 years from now, 2034, tell a totally different story from a new comic or something that has nothing to do with Logan or Iron Man or whatever. Like it's a eternal story, or it's only like those guys are dead and it's Miss Marvel and there's there's nothing else happening. So either you have to go that route, or you have to acknowledge that these are tentpole characters that we have a really hard time telling stories without, in which case they will then probably just reboot or quit.
Right. Yeah, because that's the other thing. Like, to your point, like, like to the point of needing to reboot at some point anyway, like something that I haven't thought a lot about until now, but like it's true. This is the first time this has ever been done, like a franchise that's gone on this long in this way. Star Wars is maybe the next best example, because it's all, the whole Skywalker saga is technically one story. But even then, like if for instance, like Violet gets to the age where you're like, hey, I want to show you Star Wars. That's 9 movies. Like that's a movie marathon, sure, but it's like 9 movies. But if Violet gets to the age and you're like, I want to show you the whole MCU, like you are now, like even just now currently asking her to go back and watch like 10 years of movies before she was even born, plus like
the shows,
everything else after that, just as foundation.
And plus by the time she's old enough to watch it, there'll be another 20.
Yeah. Like, and at some point that's just going to be untenable. Like that people just can't be expected. Like people that were not even alive when
I wonder if eventually you'll view it more as James Bond, where it's like,
yeah,
there are certain things about James Bond that make James Bond James Bond. And so you kind of have to have him be a certain age, and like no one's interested in seeing 90-year-old James Bond. That's not the point of James Bond as a character. Like the character doesn't exist if he's 12 or if he's 90. And so like at some point they just have to, when the actor is done, reboot James Bond. It can't be a continual story from James Bond to James Bond, because there's no way to make it make sense. And you've already told those stories. And so they just basically go, okay, when you're done, we'll find a new James Bond and choose different stories to tell. And it's the same kind of thing. I do wonder if at some point they're going to have to just say that. They're going to have to say like, no, you can show your kids like the MCU phase 1, meaning all of this was one chunk you show. But then 10 years from now, it's like, or do you want to do the next iteration of it where they started over? It's all new Iron Man. It's all new Captain America. They tell a different story. It's not Thanos, but it's like, it's the same beats Like that's going to happen, or they're going to stop making movies about it.
Yeah. Because like I think people look at Phase 4 and I think one kind of key learning there for probably everybody is like, yes, there are a lot of fun characters within Marvel and a lot of really popular ones, but it really is like every now and then one, like a new one pops up and really captures people's imaginations. Like, but it's like on one hand in terms of like Wolverine is the biggest one.
Spider-Man.
Well, but like Spider-Man, like I'm talking about people that like other than like the original crop from like the Stan Lee years.
Oh, sorry. I misheard that part.
Which is like Spider-Man, all the original Avengers, the original X-Men, like that was all kind of in there from the very beginning. Fantastic Four, obviously. And then in the decades since then, in terms of like new characters that have really been capable of like having their own fan bases beyond just like niche comic communities. It's like Wolverine, Deadpool, Miss Marvel and Miles Morales are two that obviously took off.
But the problem is it's the connected universe of it. If you want to keep that going, like you could just start a new thing and say, here's new Miss Marvel stories. Here's Miles stories.
Right.
But if any audience member is asking themselves, well, where is Bruce Banner? Then you have a problem. Because then you still have to have some other like connected temples. That or they all get their conclusion. Meaning Tony dies, Thor dies, Bruce Banner dies. They all eventually age out and die. And then we go, okay, now we're still in the cinematic universe, but now it's only Miles Morales, Miss Marvel, Kate Bishop, like, and that's all we have now. The other ones are dead. And like that's the only other option. But then my point is, if you get to that point, how long can you then do that for before someone goes like, man, you know, I just wish we had Wolverine around or Tony Stark around, you know?
Yeah, the reason I say that leads into my theory here is because I do think the Avengers roster within the comics has changed a ton over the years, but you almost always see Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. Like that is like, those are the big three even before the MCU made them that way. And even though we talk about Marvel Studios, how it was so impressive that they took from the only properties left to them because the blockbuster ones like Spider-Man and X-Men and Daredevil were off the table and Fantastic Four. Still, like the Avengers were a thing. Captain America was a well-known entity. Like it was like they were still playing with characters that most people had at least heard of. And I just think that you see something like you see projects like Eternals or Moon Knight, which like I think you could arguably say are very different critically, but neither of which necessarily feel like they could be like tentpole parts of like a new universe. Like I think that that's telling.
Or even like Guardians, like a new Guardians team isn't going to drive the whole MCU. As good as they make it, doesn't matter.
That's a great point. Yeah. So I think when they first announced.
By the way, Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds literally said that yesterday on an interview I watched. Same thing. That's what's making the rounds right now. It was just like, he's like, it's not a character that can just drive. Like he needs to be the character that reacts to stuff, but he can't be the character that just drives the whole thing. So he's like, if I see him again, it will be in other people's movies. That's what he's legit said. Like, it's not going to be like, I'm just making these films and like, we're going to center this around Deadpool. So to your point, yes. Like,
yeah.
Well, and by the way, here's what I'm going to say. The only other comp, and this is not a comp, but like it's almost closer to like Blade Runner in the 80s and then Blade Runner 2049, or like Mad Max was a thing. And then now they have a kind of a rebooted Mad Max thing. Like at some point, we're going to get that much time between it when it's 2040 that they're going to go, no, that was just the MCU in the 2000s. And now we're doing the MCU in the 2040s. It's just, it's a different, you can choose one you like. There's probably some Mad Max original truthers, you know, like,
right. Oh yeah.
That's what it's going to turn into more than. My point is, we're beating a dead horse. There's an end date. It cannot be an infinite saga to where they go. And let's hear your theory after a quick word from these sponsors. How's that teaser?
Wow. Nice. quickly, because we'll have time to unpack this more in the coming months. When Kang Dynasty was initially announced, and especially when we talked to Jeff Loveness after Quantumania.
Love Jeff. Love Jeff. Shout out Jeff.
I remember thinking that there was a good chance that we were going to see in that movie, and maybe also in Secret Wars, some adaptation of some of the stories from the Kurt Busiek Avengers that kind of almost immediately predated the Bendis Avengers that wound up heavily influencing the Infinity Saga. And part of the reason I thought that is because Kang Dynasty is a story from that run. But part of it was because Jeff specifically said, if you remember, in the interview that we did, that was one of his favorite eras of Avengers comics.
Yep.
And because shortly after that, there was the Jonathan Majors fallout and everything just kind of immediately shifted. And so I hadn't really returned to that until I saw the news yesterday. And here's why I am now thinking about Avengers Forever again, which is the 12-issue miniseries from Kurt Busiek and Carlos Pacheco. In that story, yes, you have like Kang / Immortus as the driving villains, essentially. But the thing that I find interesting is the whole premise, the reason it's called Avengers Forever, is in order to save the day and save all of reality, because of course we have a all of reality is at stake level catastrophe, which is also very Secret Wars. The solution is to summon, to create a team of Avengers by summoning different individual Avengers from different points on the timeline. And I want to be clear, in that context, it's the 616 timeline. For instance, they summon the current Ant-Man and the Wasp that are just happening in 1999 Marvel Comics at that point. But then they also summon Captain America from the 70s, from this very specific memorable period.
It's the same universe.
Yes.
Same timeline. So Spider-Man from the 60s, maybe, because he's this or whatever. Gotcha.
Right. And so, for instance, in Infinity Saga terms, it would be
Black
you would
Panther
have
from T'Challa.
Yeah, you would have maybe you could have Captain America from the first Avenger alongside Wanda from Age of Ultron. These very specific eras of the characters that we would recognize in the same way that comics readers would have recognized there.
Right.
And the whole thing is that you have a whole team of Avengers.
The Incredible Hulk before he became Smart Hulk.
Yes. Yeah. It's a whole team of Avengers, intentionally not all modern, which allowed the creators to do some interesting things dynamically to play with characters without breaking their evolution and development.
What if they pulled them from multiple timelines to assemble the greatest team possible?
And so what I'm wondering here, it could kind of be either or. There's a world where I could see
who's the
Steve
one
Rogers
doing the searching? Reed Richards?
That's kind of what I think. Because Reed is the one that I think would be, it makes sense comics wise.
I got chills. I got chills. I have chills. Can I tell you why I have chills? Because I'm going to blow your mind why I have chills. You have no idea why I have chills. It's because I am 2 chapters into that comic you sent me. That's it.
Yes.
Only 2 chapters last night. I actually sat down to read a book. First of all, I haven't read a book in years. That's the first thing. The second thing is I sat down to read a comic. Literally never happened outside of that one Hawkeye run.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 2 chapters in, and all I've read so far is that Reed is developed this machine to go observe how to fix all problems. And
it's
he's
the perfect thing to read.
I noticed in this one, this is a problem. So I have chills. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe Reed Richards and Fantastic Four goes, look, no matter what, we're headed towards disaster. Let me go look at all these universes and figure out what's the common denominator where they don't go to disaster.
Right.
And maybe it's I need Steve Rogers from the 616 timeline before, Winter Soldier. I need the 2012 616 Steve Rogers, and I need him to be paired with the endgame Tony Stark.
Well, yeah,
who's like willing to like do whatever or whatever.
Yeah,
you know
I mean, like, because and this is like just off the wall, but it's like, think about like maybe Reed or whoever finds out like, yes, at one point Captain America was able to beat Tony Stark, right? Like circa Civil War, at least, and we know that was kind of a particular situation, but you could see why there would be certain reasons to like, this character was able to do this at this point. Maybe you need to bring in like peak like Scarlet Witch like level Wanda, for the same reason, or you bring in like some version of like, I don't know, like one of the Guardians. But my point is, you can find a rationale. It's not always the most powerful version of the characters. Like, one thing that was interesting about the Avengers Forever story is they specifically pull like the like weakest version of Captain America, because it kind of creates a different dynamic with the team than a normal Captain America would have. And within story, you find out why that's useful. So like, I kind of like the idea, sort of like in Deadpool and Wolverine. He's not like the best Wolverine. It's just the one that like, but it's the one that winds up, working in that situation. So I feel like the possibilities are endless. If you wanted to do it variant wise, which I feel like you would almost have to, they've now successfully like educated us on their understanding of what a variant is. We've seen it in Loki. We've seen it in Deadpool. We've seen it in Multiverse Madness. So I'm just thinking like with Steve Rogers in particular, and this is kind of the final piece of this, like on the Avengers Forever team, you had like two different versions of Hank Pym, both on the same team. Now, granted, like one of them didn't know he was Hank Pym because comics, but that was like an interesting dynamic.
That's my favorite line you've ever said. I love that we've talked about this so many times in the podcast, and now you can just say, because comics.
The application here is like on the same day, I think, or at least I saw this making rounds the same day as the Chris Evans story. It was confirmed that Anthony Mackie will in fact be in Doomsday as Captain America. So it's not as though like, again, it could be a fake out, but I don't think what we're going to see is Chris Evans coming in to be Captain America instead of Anthony Mackie. I think that what we're going to have is both somehow, but I don't think that they are going to bring Chris Evans back again to play a totally different character. Like, I don't think he's going to play like a Johnny Storm thing again, because they will have just introduced Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. And I don't think that they're going to want to do like just a mirror image of what they're doing with RDJ, because that does feel like, I mean, maybe they will.
Can I pause you? Do you think there's a chance that RDJ plays Doctor Doom and Tony Stark in the same movie?
Yeah. I think so.
And that's part of the allure to him?
I wonder if it's more like, part of me wonders if he plays Doctor Doom and Tony Stark both in like Secret Wars. Like if that's when we see, I don't know, some return.
But Evans is in Doomsday, they said, not Secret Wars, right? So somebody's doing this, in your theory, someone's doing this alternate universe assembling in Doomsday. So wouldn't that alternate universe assembling also include Iron Man?
I don't know.
It would have to.
No, but part of me thinks like if the villain is Tony, right? Like, which is why I'm thinking like, because maybe it is Tony. Like, we don't know that Doctor Doom is not actually Tony Stark in that universe. Like, what I'm wondering is,
well, his name is Doctor Doom.
Yeah, but
yeah, I guess it's just Tony Stark gone awry.
Yeah, I mean, because Doctor Doom could be just like the moniker he takes there instead of Iron Man. Now, I don't know. Like, that's why I'm saying I could still see it ultimately being something where it's like, to beat evil Tony Stark, you ultimately need like good Tony Stark. But I wonder if the first step of that would instead be assembling people that could potentially take down Tony Stark, which is why it would be fun to like look at who they're assembling through that lens. And it would be fun to bring in Steve Rogers as like the guy who, like, if anyone knows like what makes Tony tick, it's this guy. And I don't know if that's where we're going, but I like the idea of a world where we can have Anthony Mackie as a form of Captain America, and also Steve Rogers, whether he's like wearing his old Cap costume or not. But I have to think.
I got to ask you a question. How does that play into Secret Wars then? As far as your knowledge of Secret Wars. And I know you've told me this 100 times. There's 2 different Secret Wars. One's just kind of like a battleground and you know, right. I get it. And then the other one is like more the incursion driven Hickman thing. So are you saying that theoretically there is a theory that, okay, Reed Richards goes and he pulls all these different variants out to fight for the most appropriate versions of them to fight an evil Tony Stark, who maybe doesn't even go by Doctor Doom until like the end of it or something like, or whatever. But if they defeat him in that movie, is it the fact that Reed Richards messed with all these universes now that causes incursions in Secret Wars, and Secret Wars is about a different thing? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, what is actually then causing them? Is it the fact that they messed with these timelines?
I mean, I feel like...
So like unintentionally bringing their own demise?
Yeah. So it's hard because I think what I was thinking was going to happen before the Kang change was that was going to be like they were going to be causing a bunch of incursions, and that was going to lead to Secret Wars, at which point you would have something like what in the comics where like a Doctor Doom who is not as involved in like the lead up, but then suddenly takes center stage after the incursions have like now had, you know, destroyed everything. And that would be Secret Wars. Here.
So if it had been Kang Dynasty, you're saying the Avengers are causing incursions unintentionally, you're saying, by like doing stuff, pulling people out of other
we
universes?
know that like that Strange did, at least in Multiverse of Madness.
Right. So I'm saying they do more of that. It causes incursions. And then Kang is just aware of that? Like, what's his role in that? If it had been Kang Dynasty.
If it had been Kang, I was actually thinking that it would be more like... There are different ways to go about it, but I think it could have been like a bunch of Kangs, like the Council of Kangs, trying to stop the incursions, but kind of indiscriminately and basically just trying to destroy Earth entirely, since that's where these incursions are kind of rooted, which would track some of like the Hickman Avengers stuff that Candace and I have covered. And then it could be this thing where the Avengers, by winning that battle, actually like ensure the destruction of the entire multiverse. So it's like they save Earth, but at the cost of everything. That's sort of where I thought we were heading during Kang Dynasty. Now,
could it be that with just Doom being the stand-in for the Council of Kangs somehow, that he figures out how to touch the multiverse and get out there? And is that possible?
Or yeah, I mean, it could be, because I could see where Doom would be the one that is like in the comics, Doom is very rarely wrong, which is kind of one of the fun things. Like he's like evil, but he also often will, like sometimes he veers into like anti-hero territory because what he is saying does make sense. It's just like, it kind of like Thanos-esque, I guess, in certain moments. So I could see a world where he's the one that is like, hey, we are on the verge of like this like multiversal crisis. So I'm going to take some kind of action that the heroes will view as horrific, which is also very Tony Stark. Like the whole like Tony's going to do something because he's trying to stave off something worse, but like an evil version. And then you could see someone like Reed being on the other side of that and having hope that there is another way on the other side, and then assembling people and yeah, like maybe winning, but in doing so realizing that like Doom was actually right, and then now there's like a bigger problem.
But then how would he take center stage in Secret Wars then? Like how does Doom take
where like the Doomsday thing throws me off.
Right, if it had been Kang
Avengers
Dynasty,
Forever
that's
piece,
how it lines up.
Yeah, like the Avengers Forever piece, I just keep thinking, because I don't see why you would bring Chris Evans back again, like after already bringing him back once in kind of a fun hand wavy way, and not have him play the character that everyone wants to see him play. But I don't necessarily know, like, I don't know if if they're wanting to bring Chris Evans back. Like, you know, the other thing I'll say is, like, unlike RDJ, I do think that there's a path for having Chris Evans return in a way and like move forward. Like, I don't know that we have to, like, the end game ending when it comes to Cap was clearly not as final as Tony's. Is my point.
Well, a trillion% agreed. Yeah, to your point, he could just be in the movie. He could even just be like Steve Rogers that's a little bit older.
Yeah.
That somehow
but there's a way where you could bring, like, it could just actually be like the Steve that we see like dancing with Peggy just a few years after that someone comes and like pulls in.
Right. I didn't even think, the thing about this is trippy, right? But like, we saw Steve Rogers go travel through time, live a life, and then travel back in time to that moment.
Right.
And drop it off. But what we didn't see is, like, he could have just gone back to the same timeline, lived a normal life for, you know, X amount of years, and then still time traveled back. And so, yeah, it could just be straight up Steve Rogers. I think this idea that you can pull someone in without really undoing the fact that he still is like, has that, like had that life with Peggy. And I don't know, it's like, you know, you've got like Bucky is still around. So there's some like interesting ground to cover there. Like the Sam stuff, I think that would kind of open up some interesting conversations, especially if you had like an earlier version of Cap that like had never even met Sam. Like that would be a fun, I feel like the possibilities there for a movie like this are kind of endless. I don't think it's something that we're going to get forever, but I think what I'm realizing is like, okay, this is the multiverse saga, whether you're into that or not. I'm now kind of like, let's, at this point, you got to see it through. Yeah. See it through.
Yeah. Let's at least do everything we can with it. Like, and then,
yes, because we're never going to get this chance again.
Yeah. Like, I don't think Marvel is going to ever want to do this after this. So it's almost like part of me thinks, yeah, pull out all the stops. Like, whatever it is that you think would be fun to do, if you're confident that it would be good, like, do it. Because I think what will likely happen is after that is over, I bet we wind up with basically like the Foxverse reborn for a bit, plus like the Sonyverse a little bit, but under the Marvel banner, where we have Fantastic Four having kind of taken off. We have a new X-Men starting, and we maybe still have Holland Spider-Man. So I don't know, but I guess like in closing, this all makes me excited regardless for kind of the reasons you said at the beginning. Like, I don't think that all the people involved and attached to this, especially Robert Downey Jr., would do this if they thought it was just like a cash grab. Because I feel like they all have so much respect for what they built there.
I mean, I think Chris Evans might be doing it because of how bad his Santa Claus movie is. There's a chance. Have you seen it? No, but there's a chance he did that movie and was like, my career's toast unless I go back.
Yeah, he's like, this one moment.
Is it coincidence? This was announced right after that movie is getting just destroyed.
I do. I mean, I said earlier, like,
I saw the trailer. I'm like, that might be the worst movie he could possibly do. This looks like.
I know. I like.
What are you doing, Chris?
Him and Dwayne. But
yeah,
I do.
What a team.
I think I just cannot get over like what you said and have kind of been saying more and more over the last couple of months about just like, yeah, there's something like, there are so many great stories to be told under the Marvel banner. And there are so many that have been told that don't involve Tony and Steve. But when it comes to like the MCU, even as much as I love Thor, even as much as I love Tom Holland Spider-Man, like the thing that is that, like, in the same way that like you think of X-Men, you think of like Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman and like maybe Michael Fassbender and, you know, the guy that played Xavier in those movies.
Well, and not even just the actors, but also
that was
the
a joke, by the way. People, I know that it's James McAvoy.
Oh, I missed it. Dang it. I interrupted you. I missed the McAvoy slander. not only just the actors, because I think you're right on the actor front. I also want to always reiterate the characters. Like,
yes. Yeah.
And I've said this a little bit more off air, to be fair to our podcast listeners. I haven't brought this up a ton on air. I think we wanted to do a bonus episode about it and we haven't done it yet, but I've just been thinking about that. It's like, no matter how much I love, I mean, it's no comment on the commentary, the quality or anything.
Right.
I'm just thinking like, no matter how much I love any new addition, does it ever feel like the MCU that blew up, that became the biggest thing in the world, literally, that took over and encapsulated everyone's imagination, if you don't have those two characters as the foundation? Like I said, it's kind of like doing a James Bond movie without James Bond. It's like, are we doing a Marvel movie? And that's being extreme, because I know like Spider-Man carries that weight, etc. But even Spider-Man's different, because Spider-Man carries that weight more appropriately when he's by himself. Like that's the whole thing about Spider-Man, is it doesn't even work as well. And so like, if you don't have those characters, Robby, then every story you tell from these new characters, you're going to have to take like I said earlier, you have to take the other big players off the board. Otherwise you're like, let's say we do have a reborn Foxverse, right? Let's say they lean into, there's an X-Men team, there's a Fantastic Four team. If we don't have an answer on Doctor Strange, you're still going to be wondering, why is Doctor Strange not involved if it's this bad, or it's this thing, or like, what would Logan, like, why wouldn't Logan ask Doctor Strange? Like, his sanctum's right down there. Like, go talk to him about this. So you're going to have to get an answer on all those big players to be able to fully do it without them. So like, we would need like definitive, like, Steve Rogers is off the table. Iron Man is dead. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is not coming back to this universe. Yeah. Doctor Strange and Wanda are dead. Vision is a program that no longer works. Like, you would need to do that. You need to clear. Thor is dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Captain Marvel, like, you would need an answer on all of those to fully feel like you could just start a new universe with X-Men without fans being like, why isn't Captain Marvel here? Like,
which I think you could do with the kind of finality that they're talking about with
Secret Wars.
Yeah. I do feel like this is something that we should talk about.
That's why it comes back to what you're saying. Like, I think you're right. I think if you're going to do this multiverse, you only have one shot at Secret Wars ever. It's the only kind of story like it. You're going to have to go all in on it. You're going to have to be so intensely in on it, because you know it's your only shot at doing it. And then in 4 years, we'll clear the board and we'll figure out what's next.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Gosh, man. There's no way it's not going to be just met with mixed feelings. You know, that's what I'm sitting here thinking. Like, everything about it sounds awesome. And it also sounds like, I don't know. And I don't know. I know one thing. My butt is going to be in the seat if both of them are on camera. I know that. Like, I'll be like, okay, here we go.
Wait, one sec. Hold that up.
He has to go to the bathroom so bad. You know what? I'm fine to just wrap us. So I'm going to wrap me solo while Robby's going to the bathroom. You okay with that? Okay, he just yelled, that's great. Thank you for listening. Thanks for joining us on this emergency podcast. We love you guys so much. We set out to do this episode as just like a 25-minute quick give me your theory. And as always, we get fired up about it. We get going. So I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone listening. We're getting closer and closer to Christmas. There's so much stuff going on this podcast that you can check in with. We're going to be publishing these Daredevil episodes. So if you're wanting to start a Daredevil rewatch, be sure to check those out. They'll be on the main feed. Those were Friends from Work Plus episodes. They're now on the main feed. This is a great time to subscribe to Friends from Work Plus or gift it to somebody else, because we're doing a lot of fun stuff, including a bonus MCU deep dive where we just drafted our favorite themes. It was awesome. It was really fun to do. We have a lot of fun plans on that front, including our screensaver stuff. I got a Silo episode coming out next week. So if you want to get more involved, check out Friends from Work Plus. As always, subscribe to this podcast. Check out our website, theffwpodcast.com. And thank you for listening. Welcome back, Robby. We'll talk to you next time right back here on Friends from Work.